Now, of course, Joe Biden is still trying to get a ceasefire happening. Does this successful hostage rescue change the Israeli attitudes towards anything that Biden is putting on the table?
I don't think so. But Biden's ceasefire proposal is quite sensible. He wants a temporary ceasefire to start with Hamas releasing a number of Israeli hostages and then a temporary ceasefire of whatever period, 6 weeks or more, followed by negotiations towards a permanent ceasefire. Now, the Israelis have been essentially offering that deal to Hamas for months and months. Antony Blinken, David Cameron of the UK, all the senior American officials and so on have said for months now, the obstacle to a ceasefire is Hamas. Hamas is the people who don't want a ceasefire, not the Israelis. Hamas want the Palestinians to suffer as much as possible because in their twisted, nihilistic, barbaric calculus, that's great because that means Israel is damaged internationally. Now, I think Israel itself has to make its own calculation about how much the military imperative of inflicting further damage on Hamas and the human imperative, getting their own hostages back, balances against the undeniable huge international political damage which Israel is suffering as a result of this operation.
Yeah, okay. Let's go from that to... I want to talk about a great piece that you wrote in The Australian at the weekend on the growing threat to Christianity in this country. There was one line in particular that caught my eye. You wrote that due to what you called a slew of legal, legislative, bureaucratic and cultural trends, Christianity may become like smoking, tolerated at law for a while, but ever more narrowly, with ever more restrictions actively discouraged by punitive financial measures. It was a great column. I wanted to ask you 3 questions in the time we have. Why has the culture turned against Christianity? How serious is the threat to Christians? And if the trend continues, what impact will that have on Australian society generally?
Well, James, let me start with question number 2. The government is going to back out of doing a religious discrimination law, so it won't do anything to defend religion. But eventually, a Green left Labor majority will end the exemption for Christian schools under the Sex Discrimination Act, and that will make it impossible for Christian schools to employ teachers who believe in or espouse their own values. I mean, Christian schools now employ teachers from many different backgrounds and lots of gay teachers and everything. They just don't employ activists who are against the church. But the Law Reform Commission is hostile to Christianity. It wants to destroy the rights of Christian schools. The Productivity Commission recently suggested that Christian schools' building funds should not be tax deductible donations to them, so that that would mean that the schools can't expand their plant and base and so forth. The government is going to introduce hate speech legislation, which, under the weird definition we live in today, normal Christian teaching about human sexuality will be hate speech. So we live in such a bizarre cultural moment. You can scream F the Jews and suffer no legal consequences whatsoever. But if you read out the wrong bit of St. Paul in the Corinthians, you'll be up before the Anti-Discrimination Commission like Archbishop Julian Porteous was in Tasmania. And the government is going to put criminal sanctions into this hate speech law. Now, that and a dozen other moves are designed to silence Christian institutions. And this is really only directed against Christianity. It's not directed against any other religion. Why has society gone that way? Well, we've had a long secular trend. I think our society is going crazy. All the other societies I deal with, spending so much of my time in Asia, Muslim Indonesia, Buddhist Thailand, Catholic Philippines, Christianity in China, they're all on fire, religious belief. But we've got now a very intolerant form of liberalism, which requires Christians to genuflect towards woke ideology. And what will the consequences be? The consequences will be that they will harass and intimidate Christians and promote a more barbaric society, because everything we like in our society, all the gentleness in our society, human rights, equality of the sexes, welfare policy, hospitals, everything else, comes from the Christian and Jewish traditions.
Yeah. It's interesting, Greg. I note that Richard Dawkins, who famously has ridiculed Christianity for the better part of his career, is now saying he calls himself a cultural Christian and he hopes Christianity doesn't disappear. So we live in interesting times. Greg Sheridan, appreciate your time tonight.